Hi everybody. This is Vanessa, and we are here with Mrs. Tala Batangan, which is the managing editor of the Private Sector Watch, which is the focus of this video. And she is a policy officer for the Asia Pacific region, and she works for the Reality of Aid, which is a global network that analyzes and advocates for poverty eradication in the international cooperation regime. So my first question is what we can say about the positive and negative aspects that arise from your study.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. The Private Sector Watch is basically a compilation of different case studies discussing different initiatives around the globe on how private sector is partnering with governments on how to implement development initiatives. And what we found is that there's certain limitation and challenges, not just seen recently with the emergence of private sector in the development cooperation arena, but in decades of public-private partnerships. So we've seen that overall in the development cooperation arena, there is certain inadequacies of the existing development frameworks. Most cases of private sector engagement have exacerbated instead of alleviated development projects. We see the violation of human rights, negative impacts on the communities and the environment, on ethical financial transactions, among others. And there's also really a lack of coherence in current official development assistance or aid policies and the direction of development cooperation around the world. So with that, we also see that there's really a need to not just partner with multinational corporations to promote the role of other private sector entities, more small scale, like micro, small, and medium enterprises, social enterprises that can really contribute to national industrializations, but also looking into what kind of private sector entities can we engage to further development outcomes, to use the private sector financing to a good purpose and to really serve the needs of the marginalized. Also, there's absence of genuine inclusive partnerships with civil society organization, community-based organizations, local actors, which is consistent with the trend of shrinking civic space as well. So it all ties together.
So given that, which will be the main recommendations that arise from the report?
For government and private sector partners, first of all, we call that they must immediately stop unsustainable development actions that are harming people and the environment. Second is that governments must also improve their mechanisms for monitoring, regulation, and accountability of private sector involvement, and ensuring that the private sector adheres to the Kampala principles, but also to international human rights and labor rights standards as well. And for governments also, they must also fulfill their mandate in providing public services and goods. So they must not abandon that role to the private sector and lead to the privatization of much needed social services and goods. For development partners, they must ensure inclusive partnerships through the establishment of multi-stakeholder mechanisms, and dialogues and consultations with the community, with civil society organizations, with the government, and with the private sector. So all of them should be at the table. We also call that governments and also development partners must prioritize gender-sensitive, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as local entrepreneurs as private sector partners in utilizing public finance, because they have the capacity to actually enact national industrialization and self-reliance. And for private sector entities, we also call, as I mentioned earlier, to adopt and adhere to internationally agreed guidelines and binding regulations in conducting both its business activities and development initiatives. So even if for-profit projects and for-profit activities, they should also be mindful that they have to adhere to human rights standards. And lastly, we also call on the government and other development actors to support CSOs in enhancing their role in monitoring, measuring, and then disseminating the results and impacts of private sector engagement. They would always ensure that there's an actor that would hold the private sector and government accountable for any impacts that they might have. So those are the main recommendations that we've gotten from these 8 case studies from around the globe.
Thank you, Mrs. Batangan.